What's up, guys? Happy Friday. Hope that everybody's doing well. Um, so, another one of these. This one might be a little bit more extensive than yesterday's. I hope you enjoyed yesterday's. I think that, after watching through it again, I liked it. I think that, hopefully, if you go through it and just kind of pause and make sure that, you're keeping up with it, I think that it should be a pretty effective lesson. Same thing with today. Remember, guys, we got your student sheet and your notes. So make sure that you're keeping up with both of those. And again, as always, pause throughout the video, please. Make sure that you're pausing and um, writing down, recording stuff on your student activity sheet and your notes as well, and then turning and talking whenever I ask. So make sure that your partner is also keeping pace with you. Um, if you are not sitting beside somebody and you see somebody alone, then please go over and sit beside them, so that way you have a partner and somebody to kind of do this with you, because it makes it better. Um, all right, guys. So yesterday we talked about how banks work. We talked a lot about, what is money, inflation, how does banks work, and then now we're going to talk about GDP, right? So all of this is talking about basically the value of money and then how money is changed in hands. GDP is kind of continuing on the value of money. So let's go ahead and proceed. So today, our central question is, how do we measure GDP, and what does GDP tell us about the economy? So I want you to answer the following on your student activity sheet. Go ahead and start thinking about these. This is your bell ringer day. Um, so go ahead and pause me, and then I'll meet you on the next slide after you've recorded these. All right. So, hopefully on the bell ringer, you're kind of realizing what kind of goes into this in terms of, obviously not just 1,800 calories, but everything that goes into, your macros, all that type of stuff. That is essentially what we're going to be talking about GDP, just in obviously in economic terms. Um, so background: assume two countries exist, fruit and dairy. Use the information below to determine which economy is performing better. Go ahead and look at this scenario. It's on your student sheet as well, and go ahead and mark that down um, on your student sheet and decide which one is performing better. Which one just do you think performing better based off what you're looking at right here? So the answer, dairy country is performing better according to GDP. So you kind of see some of the things that goes into GDP: $10 apples, $15 oranges, $5 in government spending, minus $15 in cow imports, counted as a negative. So you might be thinking, like, what am I looking at right here? I don't know what this is. Well, um, obviously, I'm not expecting you to know what GDP is right now, but this is just kind of tells you that GDP is a whole bunch of stuff compiled into one statistic. And obviously, with that, there's going to come pros and cons. All right, so just as a little warm up again, I want you to use the space in your notes to respond to the prompts below, kind of getting prepared for um, this lesson. So, based on your prior knowledge and the warm up activity, what do you think GDP is? What kind of expenditures count towards GDP? What counts as negative? So, just based off the prior slide, just what are some of the things that you think goes into it? And then also, why is it important to measure the success of an economy, regardless of if we're using GDP at all, whatever we're using, why is it important to measure the success of an economy as a whole? Go ahead and jot those down, and then we'll meet on the next slide. So, GDP is gross domestic product. Okay, so gross total domestic within a country, obviously. So, anytime you hear domestic, we've talked about domestic policies being within a country. Remember guns and butter, those domestic policies being within a country. And then lastly, product. So, goods and services sold within a country. Within a given period of time, GDP is the sum of the prices of all final goods and services within a country. When GDP is steadily increasing, it usually means the economy is producing at a higher capacity over time, right? So this is uh, mainly about production, so goods and services, um, in terms of what the country is able to import and export, mainly export, right? So if you judge on the last one, remember it said imports are going to be a negative from your GDP, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So measuring GDP just helps us understand whether the economy is growing or stagnating from year to year. So it gives us a decent gauge on the economy as a whole in terms of production. So, guys, I want you to click on this link. It's your first link on your student activity sheet. There's a hyperlink there. Go ahead and watch that link, watch that video on GDP, and then when you're done with that, just go ahead and pause me and watch that video, and then I'll meet you on the next slide. All right, GDP formula. Here it is. C plus I plus G plus NX. That's it. That's all you need to know. Get after it. That's your formula. All right, obviously, I'm joking around a little bit. Um, So I can already see Andre laughing. Thanks, Andre. I appreciate you always indulging in my sense of humor. Um, but regardless, that's for first vlog. um, so what goes into this, right? So what is C? The first one, C, is consumption. The prices of all final goods and services purchased by consumers. It is the biggest portion of GDP. So, for example, in one year you buy a car, a bicycle, and you get your nails done every month. All of this is counted in GDP. These are all goods and services that you purchased. So notice that inputs are not included in GDP. Remember what inputs are? Inputs are those scarce resources that go into making an output. Inputs aren't counted because we don't want to double count goods. We only want to count finished goods. So it can be kind of hard to understand, but it's essentially like in the video, he talks about how it will count eggs that you buy at the grocery store just to take home, but it doesn't count the eggs made in a cake that a baker sells at Publix, right? So the eggs that were used to make that cake, they don't count that in GDP, but they would count it if you just straight up bought eggs at Publix. Um, so why would counting inputs in GDP be double counting? Go ahead and think about that for a second. All right, next one, business investment. Money businesses have spent on capital goods and any unsold goods that were produced that year. So, for example, in one year, a business purchased a new piece of machinery and produced $500 worth of unsold product. This is all counted in GDP. The buying and selling of stocks is not included in GDP because the business spends money it makes from the stock market on investing in their growth. So to avoid double counting, stocks are not counted. So the same process kind of works with the inputs. They make money on the stock market that they then spend on goods and services or whatever inputs, um, or like machinery, whatever the case may be, technological advances. So to avoid double counting, stocks are not counted because they make money off of those stocks, and they spend it on certain inputs. Next one, government spending. Money that any level of the government has spent does not include Social Security, as that transfers money from one check to another. So, for example, one year the state government pays teachers, postal workers, and purchases new flashlights for police officers. These are all counted in GDP. So, my salary is counted in GDP. Yes, I'm special. Um, we all knew that. I didn't have to tell you that. We knew that anyways. I'm obviously special. I'm counting the GDP. Are you? Right. Didn't think so. All right, just kidding. All kidding aside, moving on to net exports minus imports, right? So you want to export more than you import, obviously. Um, the value of all goods and services exported minus all goods imported, so brought into the country. So things that are imported are actually not counted towards, it's actually negative into a country's GDP. So, for example, like if I went to the store and I bought, I don't know, let's say um, any product that was imported from Italy. Let's say cheese, perhaps. Let's just say I went to the store, bought cheese that was straight up imported from Italy. This would not count towards the United States GDP. As a matter of fact, that cheese would count negatively towards the United States GDP. So now it's your turn to kind of look at some of the things that go into GDP and what doesn't go into GDP as well. So I want you to go ahead and pause me, click on that hyperlink on your student activity sheet, and this should take you to like kind of an interactive thing. And you'll turn in a JPEG at the end, submit it into your student activity sheet as an image. But go ahead and do that. It's kind of fun, and then it really helps you to understand what goes in or what doesn't go into GDP. All right, so I want you to think about some of these questions for a second. Just kind of read them and think about them. What is one U.S. made good you think your parents or grandparents bought at a price much lower than it is today? We've talked about this a little bit. Why was it cheaper? Again, we've talked about that too. So we should know that. If your parents and grandparents bought 20 of those items back in the day, how much money would be counted in GDP back then? If you bought the same amount today at a higher price, how much money would be counted in GDP today as a result? Based on your answer's result, what is a limitation to GDP? And I'm sure you can already guess it's inflation, right? Um, Obviously, when your parents and grandparents bought stuff, they were a little bit cheaper because we talked about this past week with inflation and prices rising, your purchasing power is not the same as it was a few years ago. So that value of a dollar, that $1 that I have, is no longer worth what it was a few years ago, right? Because the price is inflated. It goes along with supply and demand a little bit, like we've discussed. So inflation. So how does GDP adjust to inflation? Well, they have something called uh, real and nominal GDP. So nominal is just raw data. It's just using current prices straight up. Real GDP is adjusted for inflation. So it conveys purchasing power in constant dollars. So it tries to basically translate that 1950 dollar into 2024 dollars. Tries to basically even out the purchasing power to try to make it as um, as similar as possible in terms of the value. So think about it for a second. Which type of GDP do you think would be most useful? Nominal or real, and why? Why don't you go ahead and talk to your partner about this one? Because go ahead and pause me, talk to your partner about this one, and then give you about a minute, and then come back to me on and join me on the next slide. So obviously, hopefully you came at this conclusion. Real GDP is more useful because it allows us to accurately compare GDP from year to year to determine growth or stagnation. So it allows me to compare the GDP from 1950 to the GDP now. Um, it's just a lot easier to use it because it adjusts to inflation, right? Because obviously the GDP number is not going to be the same in 1950 as it is now, but that doesn't mean that the economy now is necessarily better or worse. It just, it depends on the inflation, right? It's all dependent upon inflation and that purchasing power. So next thing I want you to do here, I want you to click on that link at the student activity sheet. Go ahead and play this little storyline game. It's just only one graph. It's all it is asking you to kind of guess what the United States GDP is uh, from year to year from I think 1950. So go ahead and play that game and come back to me. It shouldn't take you very long at all. Take you about less than a minute. So go ahead and pause me, play that game, and then we'll come back. All right, guys. So next thing I want you to do is we're going to watch a video on nominal and real GDP. So go ahead and pause me, click on that link on your student activity sheet, and pause me, watch that video, and then we'll meet on the next slide. All right, so right here, just an example of nominal and real GDP. So you get nominal right here. Remember, this is just price of in terms of current dollars. So this is current U.S. dollars each year. So, in the price of current U.S. dollars, it looks like Venezuela's GDP is doing really, really good. Um, Obviously on an uptick. But if you look at the real GDP, right, so adjusted for inflation, Venezuela's real GDP is pretty low and not very, it's pretty stagnant, as you can see. So obviously a huge difference. Look at the difference between 482 billion and 19 billion, adjusted to inflation. Pretty significant stuff. So I want you to turn and talk with your partner. Based on this, what can we assume about what is going on about Venezuela's economy? So we've talked about it before. We talked about it earlier this week. What can we assume about Venezuela's economy? Hyperinflation, obviously. They are going through a serious period of hyperinflation. So obviously their purchasing power with that dollar has decreased, which, and go back to that nominal GDP, it looks like it's on the uptick, right? Because the value of the dollar is decreased. So, that 482 billion is not exactly quite what it was, a few years ago. And you can see that in the real GDP. So looking at per capita, anytime you see per capita, guys, this is per person. And this is not just on GDP. Anytime you ever see per capita, this is going to be per person. So GDP per capita is real GDP. So remember, that's the one adjusted by inflation, divided by the country's population. So why is this useful? Well, it allows us to determine whether wealth is distributed evenly across the nation's population. This can help determine that country's standard of living, make sure that there isn't a huge swing in terms of what we call that top 1% or whatever, and then some of the lower class. So per capita tries to make sure that that wealth is being distributed at least somewhat even. Obviously, not perfectly even um, in capitalist society, but at least somewhat even. So, guys, I want you to watch this video. Go ahead and click that link on your student activity sheet. Watch that about per capita, and then I'll meet you on the next slide. So go ahead and pause me, watch that video, and then meet me on the next slide. So, just a think, pair, share right here. You can go ahead and talk to your partner about this. If a country has a high real GDP but a low GDP per capita, what can that indicate? And then next one, do you think GDP per capita is a useful measurement of a country's standard of living? And then why or why not? Are there flaws, or do you think it is useful, and why or why not? So go ahead, pause me, talk about it, and then I'll meet you on the next slide. So talking about some criticism of GDP, going back to those Turner talks, if a country has a high real GDP but a low GDP per capita, what can that indicate? Well, typically that can indicate a pretty significant gap in the wealth of the country. Um, and so some criticisms here in terms of the usefulness of it. It doesn't give us the full picture of a standard of living, or indicate even how evenly income is distributed. So, like, it can be really tough uh, to use this, especially with a country as large as the United States, and also with a country, um, I would say, not as recorded as the United States. So, it doesn't include the value of work done in the home or volunteering. It doesn't account for negative externalities. Remember, externalities we discussed earlier in the year doesn't account for negative externalities such as pollution, right? So even though that machine that made $500 that we talked about earlier in the class, even though that machine might have made $500 just off of pure profit and pure production, what if it costed the government more money to, limit those negative externalities, right? So technically, the government then would be losing money. It also does not include the goods and services purchased on the black market. We've all heard about the black market. You can do research away from school on that topic. So, who officially measures GDP for the U.S.? The Bureau of Economic Analysis measures GDP. The BEA is under the Department of Commerce, just for your information there about the BEA. What about investments Americans have made abroad? American investments outside the border are not counted in GDP. Obviously, that just like imports coming in are not um, counted in GDP. Same thing with investments outside the borders, because why would it? Another way of measuring an economy is GNP, so gross national product. It uses a different formula and also includes overseas investment. So, guys, I want you to watch this video. This is something for you guys to kind of look at. It's kind of interesting talking about the top 15 countries each year from year to year. So, it's pretty fun. Go ahead and watch through that. Uh, you can watch through it and just kind of note some things that you find interesting about it or not. But go ahead and pause me and click on that video link on your student activity sheet, and then we'll roll from there. All right, guys, last thing that we got, we're going to do a standard of living research assignment. It's pretty fun. You get to kind of choose some countries that you want to investigate, that you want to research. You can look at several statistics and several things. You're going to be doing some your own individual research on it. So go ahead and have fun with it. It should be a lot of fun as long as you make sure that you're putting effort into it. Choose countries that you're interested in. Choose countries that you want to research, and go ahead and get after that. Uh, so, guys, I appreciate you following along with me. Hopefully, it went really well. And make sure that you turn in your student activity sheet from yesterday into Schoology along with the assignment. And same thing for today. When we're done with this lesson, you can go ahead and pop that student activity sheet into Schoology, and then you can also turn in this standard of living research assignment as well. So, guys, I appreciate you. I'll see you on Monday. See you back there. But it's been fun. Hopefully, you've gotten a lot out of it, and I know that I've really enjoyed it so far. So I'm glad that we're able to get some stuff out of it, even though I'm not there. Just make sure that you're keeping up with your notes and your student activity sheet and everything. All right, guys. Have a good rest of your day. Make sure to get that done and be good. Be careful this weekend. Have fun. And yeah. All right, guys. See you later.